Africa. Hurricane Erika is moving slowly tonight. The hurricane and its track tops this edition of WeatherScope. Hi, I'm Christina Abernathy.
And I'm Sharon Resulta. And in the meantime, back in the lower 48, scattered thunderstorms are, well, they're still popping across the region. And we're going to have a look at those details in just a moment. But first, a closer look at Hurricane Erika and the latest coordinates as of 11 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. Notice that things haven't changed very much as we go through the evening hours. If you've been watching throughout the evening, we haven't seen a whole lot of change. Only a slight fluctuation in the pressure, and that has actually gone up and then back down a millibar, so it ends up about where it was several hours ago. There are the coordinates if you're plotting at home: 220 miles to the east-northeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico, 85 miles per hour winds, and again, so Category 1 hurricane. West-northwestward movement continues, but it has slowed down significantly, now moving only around 7 miles per hour. Here's a look at your hurricane watches. Again, as long as this is still lurking out here, the Hurricane Center has decided to keep those watches established. Very good idea. So if you're watching from Puerto Rico on into the Virgin Islands, keep in mind that hurricane watches remain in effect for you. We have seen some squally weather here. The winds have not exactly picked up just yet. But again, the west-northwestward movement, should it continue, should keep the brunt of this to the north. But one little wobble southward could mean a drastic difference. So we encourage you to kind of keep an eye on things overnight. And certainly if you're just getting ready to retire for the evening, tune in first thing in the morning and find out the status. There's a look again at the wind profiles, and the strongest winds, the hurricane force winds, have actually been north and east of the center of circulation. And with the storm itself passing to the north of the northernmost islands like St. Martin and Anguilla, well, we haven't seen really anything but just a glancing blow across these regions. But again, any little slight change in the track could mean a different scenario into the Virgin Islands and on into Puerto Rico. And while we're not expecting that to happen, it's always a possibility with a tropical system, so we'll have to keep an eye on this region. There's a look at it from a satellite perspective, and again, we've seen the convection flaring up and then dying out. That's been the history with this particular hurricane. It looks like it's trying to get itself a little more organized around the center of circulation. Notice that you don't see a lot of forward movement to it. Again, it has slowed down considerably. So the big threat here might also be the potential for some coastal flooding into the northern and eastern facing shores of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. So we do have some coastal flood warnings in effect for those regions. Also, any bands of rain or thunderstorms that move on through could produce maybe some localized flooding, especially in some of those higher elevations. Watch out too for the high surf. High surf advisories are out for some regions as well. Again, there's a look at the situation. You can see the hurricane itself not moving very quickly at all. We continue to watch our trough lifting out of the eastern part of the nation. We do expect another one to lift on in, and should it be just deep enough, it will help to curve this off to the north. That still remains to be seen, but even if it doesn't happen, this is still days and days away from the U.S. We'll keep them up.
The Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
Well, it's time now for our tropical update, and we want to take a look at the very latest on what's going on with our hurricane, Hurricane Erika. Now centered at 19.7 north, 63 west. That puts the center about 210 miles east-northeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. The maximum sustained wind still at 85 miles per hour, and it is now moving to the west-northwest at 7 miles per hour, so it has slowed a bit from earlier. The pressure, 981 millibars. We do have hurricane watches in effect for Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. Now, it is moving off to the west-northwest. However, any southward wobble in that trek could bring some windy conditions into this area, into Puerto Rico or to the Virgin Islands. So again, hurricane watches are in effect here. Something else to keep in mind is that because it is moving so slowly, the water really will begin to pile up here, and that could cause some problems with coastal flooding, also with heavy surf, and there is the potential for flash flooding as well as maybe some heavy rain and some of the squalls. A look at the winds show that the strongest winds, the hurricane force winds, are to the north and east of the center of circulation here, while tropical storm force winds extending well out from the center. But again, the strongest winds to the north and the east of the center of circulation. Look at our satellite view, shows that we have seen an increase in some of the deep convection here, noting sort of an elongated eye as well. So we'll continue to watch this, but again, the things to keep in mind is that it is moving off to the west-northwest, but any southward sort of wobble, and that could bring some windier conditions on into Puerto Rico and into the Virgin Islands. Also, with the persistent winds here, we will see the water piling up. That could cause some coastal flooding problems, some heavy surf certainly. And with some of the squally weather that could come in with some of the bands around our hurricane, we could see some heavy amounts of rain as well. So we'll continue to monitor it for you. Stay tuned to the Weather Channel. A look at our water vapor imagery showing our hurricane right here, Hurricane Erika. Now what we're thinking as far as the U.S. is concerned is that trough is going to sharpen as we head through time over the eastern U.S., and that would tend to lead us to believe that it doesn't have much of a chance to make it to the U.S. Of course, that is not 100% sure. That is what the forecast calls for, but the best thing to do, just stay tuned to the Weather Channel, and we will keep you updated. We'll continue to monitor the situation and keep you updated with the very latest. Into the Gulf of Mexico we go, and we do see some cloud covering and some convection here. That's associated with a front. Any development, if it occurred here, would be rather slow and certainly not looking very promising right now, but we'll monitor this as well. Out into the Atlantic we go, another view of our Hurricane Erika. We also see a wave here out to the east, a bit of convection with it, but conditions not terribly favorable for development. We'll continue to watch that, as well as watching those waves move off the coast of Africa. Into the Pacific we go. Tropical Depression Kevin really on the downside. It is really weakening and not nearly as well organized as it was earlier, and it looks like it's on the way out. Not much of a chance of regeneration.
The Weather Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
This tropical update is brought to you by Rayovac.
Well, let's start by checking out the coordinates of Erika. Erika has gone through a little bit of strengthening earlier this morning. It's also slowed down a little bit. Hurricane Erika, as of 5 o'clock AST, that's Atlantic Standard Time, same as Eastern Daylight Time, is centered at 19.9 north and 63.3 west, 200 miles east-northeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Its winds are 85 miles per hour, moving west-northwest at 7, and its pressure has dropped to 976 millibars. That's from 981 on the last advisory. Now, just check the observation on San Juan, Puerto Rico, and they're getting some northerly winds right now that are gusting to about 26 knots. That's about 31 miles per hour. So right now, we don't have anything worse than that for San Juan, but it is affecting it. And because Erika sits out here to the north and the east of the islands, you're going to see some swells today. They've already begun tonight that will be inordinately big because of Erika, this welling up of the water as the circulation around this is bringing the water and the winds from the north, both across Puerto Rico and Anguilla, Antigua, St. Martin's, probably St. Croix, St. Thomas, also the British Virgin Islands, the U.S. Virgin Islands here. Now, all the warnings, the hurricane warnings have been dropped. We still have hurricane watches in effect for Puerto Rico and those islands, and with that slowing, you have to keep that watch there. Now, they may drop them later if Erika continues to move to the northwest, but right now we still have the watches in effect. Now, the tropical storm force winds extend out some 150 miles around the center of circulation, while the hurricane force winds are pretty tightly wound around the system, but mostly to the north and east of the system. So it's not affecting the islands being even a little further south than the tropical storm force winds. Now here's your circulation. Notice just a couple of hours ago on the satellite picture, big massive red area developed around the eye, trying to rotate around the eye. Center of circulation just about down in this area here, and Erika moving that direction. There's Puerto Rico. We're getting some squally weather right now around St. Martin. Antigua indicated they've had a thunder shower over the last hour or so. So squally conditions can certainly be expected, and all of the interests here in the islands should monitor the situation closely, especially over the next couple of days, given the fact that Erika has slowed and has intensified somewhat. But so far, it seems to still be moving away from Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And if there's any good news with the hurricane, that's certainly it. Keep it away from land areas. Notice this big trough that's protecting, kind of like the shield protecting the lower 48 states. If Erika continues on its current course, by midweek, Erika is forecast to move on to the north and then maybe even to the northeast and head back out to sea. But if it slows and sits here for some time, all of these dynamics change and we could see another situation set up. But right now, it doesn't look like it's going to be a threat to the lower 48 states at all. Getting away from Erika for a moment, had some very heavy rain in the southern portions of Florida yesterday, 5 inches around Miami Beach, and we've got an old frontal boundary here, and we've had showers and thunderstorms developing here, and it's in a favorable location for something of a tropical nature to develop over time, but nothing imminent here at all. And again, there's Erika spinning about north of Puerto Rico. Further out in the Atlantic, we have another disturbance here, but the outflow from Erika and the upper level winds not conducive to this one developing further. So it bears watching depending upon what happens to Erika, but right now it is not a threat to develop any further. Off the African coast, a couple of waves, and nothing, I'm happy to report, in the eastern Pacific. We'll be back with Weather Scope.
Channel. No place on Earth has better weather.
This tropical update is sponsored by the Home Depot, where low prices are just the beginning.
All right, let's go ahead and check out the latest on Hurricane Erika. And we do see the latest coordinates here, 20.2 north, 63.3 west. And that's 200 miles to the northeast of San Juan, Puerto Rico. Maximum sustained winds remain at 85 miles an hour. And we do see it now drifting to the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. And the minimum central pressure remains at 976 millibars. We have hurricane watches remaining in effect in the areas here in orange, and that does include Puerto Rico and also the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. And the reason why? Well, the storm is not too far away, and any kind of wobble off to the south could be directly affecting these areas. But at this point, we do see most of the action remaining offshore, and you can see the areas in the darker shades of orange with hurricane force winds extending to the north and also to the northeast. Now the areas in yellow, we do have the tropical storm force winds, and those also for the most part are remaining offshore. And we have been getting some gusts at St. Thomas and also St. Martin today, up to 30 to 40 miles an hour. So it is a bit breezy and gusty along the islands, and we could see some heavier rainfall as well. And as we go back to our maps, let's go ahead and take a look at what we do have as far as our satellite is concerned, there we go, and you can see how we are getting those outer rain bands just now beginning to move across the islands and also Puerto Rico. And within those outer rain bands, we could see some heavy downpours. And when you have those, we could have some flooding, especially in some of the flood-prone areas of the islands. And also with these winds coming along the north shore and the northeast shore, we could see some higher than normal tides. And so there are coastal flood watches in effect for the northeastern portions of Puerto Rico. We also have flash flood watches in effect for the Virgin Islands, as well as northeast and eastern Puerto Rico. So be careful if you are living in these areas. We also could see the possibility of some beach erosion with some of these large northeasterly swells. Here's a look at the radar, and you can see how those rains continue to come on down as they curve around the hurricane, which still, the hurricane force winds are still well offshore. Again, just some gusty winds here in St. Martin earlier today, up to 43 miles an hour. On our water vapor imagery loop, you can see what is the future for Hurricane Erika. And we are watching this front and trough that continues to hang out here. And the thinking with the National Hurricane Center is that it is eventually going to steer it up to the northwest and to the north and then to the northeast, away from the United States, which is definitely some good news. We've also been watching the tail end of this front for possible development in the Gulf of Mexico. We do have high pressure overhead here, and that's conducive for formation of tropical storms, but at this point we do not see anything happening as far as tropical formation in the Gulf or in the Caribbean. A little bit farther out in the Atlantic, we have a tropical wave here, and you can see kind of the